What happened when the bully teacher found out that I am the principal's son? I begged my dad not to tell anyone he was my dad. Like, actually begged. We moved districts the summer before 7th grade because of his job, and I made him swear he wouldn't walk me to class or show up at anything he didn't have to. I didn't want the whole nepotism thing following me around, kids finding out and treating me different or worse, hating me for it before they even knew me. So on paperwork, I used my mom's last name. Nobody connected the dots, not even the teachers. There was this one teacher, Ms. Halloran, 7th grade science, who decided pretty early I was her project. I was quiet, I asked a lot of questions, and I guess that read as annoying to her. She'd mock how I raised my hand, mimic my voice a little under her breath, loud enough for the class to laugh. She called me things like professor in this real snide tone. I told myself it was fine. I told my dad even less was fine because I didn't want him fixing it and proving every kid right about me. It went on for months. She'd single me out for random locker checks, misplace my homework even when I turned it in early, tell me I was wasting a seat that some other kid actually wanted. One time she made me read my lab report out loud and then told the class, well, at least he can read. And everyone laughed the fake kind of laugh where they're not really sure if it's okay to, but they do it anyway. I started faking stomach aches on the days I had her class, and my mom started noticing, but I kept saying school was just boring, nothing else. I didn't want it to be a whole thing. What I never told anyone, not even my mom at first, is that there was another kid it happened to too. A girl named Valeria who sat 2 seats over from me, quiet like I was, the kind of quiet that gets read as weird instead of just quiet. Ms. Halloran used to forget her name on purpose, call her by the wrong name for weeks even after being corrected, and laugh when Valeria tried to correct her again. Valeria and I never really talked about it directly, we just kind of exchanged this look sometimes, this tired look like, yeah, today's one of those days. I used to think if there were 2 of us feeling it, it must be normal. It must just be how middle school is. That's the part that actually eats at me now, looking back. How easily I convinced myself something that bad was just ordinary. There was a day in October I still think about a lot. We had a group project, and Ms. Halloran paired me with 2 kids who genuinely hated group work, hated being told what to do, and when the project came out mediocre because I'd done basically all of it alone, she stood at the front of the room and read my grade out loud along with a comment about how some students need to learn to carry weight instead of hiding behind smart kids. I hadn't hidden behind anyone. I'd done the whole thing at my kitchen table until 11 at night while my dad worked late in his office down the hall, and I remember going home that day and just sitting in my closet for a while, not even crying really, just sitting there because it felt like the only place in the house small enough to match how small I felt. There's this other memory that comes back to me at random times, usually late at night for no reason at all. We had a substitute one Friday, and for one single class period nobody made fun of the way I talked or rolled their eyes when I answered a question. I remember walking out of that room feeling almost normal, feeling like myself again for 42 minutes, and then realizing on the walk to my locker that I was actually happy about one ordinary class period. And something about that realization hurt more than any single insult ever had. It made me understand, really understand, how far down my baseline had dropped without me noticing it happening. I started keeping a mental list, which sounds dramatic typing it out now, but I did. I kept track in my head of every time she singled me out, like some part of me knew I might need proof someday, even though I had no plan to ever use it. Tuesday, she made me redo an assignment in front of everyone because my handwriting looked lazy. Thursday, she skipped my raised hand 3 times in a row and called on kids behind me instead. I never wrote any of it down on paper because I was terrified someone would find the list and ask what it was, so I just carried it around in my head instead, this quiet inventory of small cruelties nobody else seemed to be counting. I want to be honest, there were nights I almost told my dad everything. I'd stand outside his office door with my hand actually on the handle, and then I'd think about what would happen the second word got out that the quiet kid with the science teacher problem was the principal's son. I pictured it exactly. I pictured kids saying I only complained because I could get someone fired with one phone call. I pictured Ms. Halloran telling everyone I was a spoiled brat who ran to daddy. I'd rather take the mocking, I told myself, than take that. So I'd let go of the handle and go back to my room and tell myself tomorrow would be better. And it never really was. It just became normal enough that I stopped noticing how not normal it was. Then one afternoon, she caught me passing a note that wasn't even mine, some other kid's note, and instead of just taking it, she grabbed my arm to pull me out of my seat in front of everyone. Grabbed hard. I had 4 little bruises the shape of her fingers by dinner that night, right below my elbow, and I remember just staring at them in the bathroom mirror deciding whether to say anything. I actually put my sleeve down first, stood there in the bathroom pulling my sleeve over it, practicing in the mirror how I'd act totally normal at dinner, because some stubborn part of me still didn't want this to be the thing that made my secret come out. But my mom has this radar. She always has. pause, and she caught my arm gently while I was reaching for the salt, and I flinched before I even meant to, and that flinch gave the whole thing away faster than any bruise could have. I showed my mom. She didn't yell, she just got real quiet and took a picture on her phone and said, "You're telling your father tonight. This isn't about being embarrassed anymore." I remember sitting at the table after that, not eating anything, just moving food around, and my little sister asking why nobody was talking, and my mom telling her to finish her plate in this voice that meant not right now. I felt like I'd broken something just by having bruises, like it was my fault for letting it get to this point, for sitting on it for months when maybe if I'd said something in September, none of this would have happened at all. I know now that's not fair to myself, but that's exactly what it felt like in that moment, sitting there with my sleeve rolled back down like it could undo what my mom had already seen. So I told him, and I watched his whole face change. That calm principal face just dropped. He didn't say much right away, he just asked to see it again, and he looked at it for a long time, longer than made sense for 4 bruises, like he was trying to memorize it. Then he asked me one question that I wasn't ready for. He asked how long, not what happened, not who else knows, just how long. And when I said since September, I watched something in him just cave in a little, like he was doing math in his head. About every day he'd walked past my classroom without knowing. He apologized to me that night, which caught me completely off guard. He said he should have pushed harder to know how I was actually doing instead of accepting fine as an answer for months. I told him it wasn't his fault, and he said maybe not, but it was still his to fix now. And it stopped being complicated the second it stopped being about protecting my privacy and started being about protecting me. He didn't storm into her classroom the next morning like I was scared he would. He did it properly, pulled the file, called her into his office with HR sitting in, showed the picture, and asked her to walk him through her own account of what happened first, before she knew what he had. She lied, said I'd lunged at her, said she was defending herself, real confident about it too, sitting there with her arms crossed like she'd already won. The HR woman in the room, I found out later, actually asked my dad if he wanted to step out and let someone else handle it, since I was his kid, and it might look better on paper if he wasn't the one running the meeting. He said no, real calm, and told her he'd sat through enough of these meetings as an administrator to know exactly what happens when the person with the most at stake gets asked to leave the room. He said he was staying, and he was staying as her boss first, and everything else came second. That's when he told her who he was to me. I heard later from another teacher that Ms. Halloran actually asked to see my enrollment records right there in his office, like she needed proof, like it had to be a mistake, like the universe owed her one more chance to spin the story her way. It wasn't a mistake, and the room apparently went dead silent when HR pulled out 3 other complaints filed over the past 2 years, complaints that had gone nowhere because nobody with any real power had bothered to connect them, including one from Valeria's mom the year before I ever showed up at that school. It wasn't just about me by the time it was over. That's the part that actually matters most looking back. It became about every kid she'd made feel small in a room where nobody believed them enough to do anything about it. Valeria's mom got a call that same week. So did 2 other families. Some of them cried on the phone, my dad told me later, not out of relief exactly, more out of this strange grief for the year their kid had already lost by the time anyone listened. She was let go by the end of that week, and the story that spread through the building wasn't, "The principal's kid got special treatment." It was that she'd been like that with other quiet kids for years and nobody with any power had noticed until it happened to be me. I heard some kids saying I should feel lucky that if my dad wasn't the principal, nothing would have ever happened to her. And honestly, that part still sits weird with me because they're not wrong. It shouldn't take a coincidence like that for a kid to be believed. Valeria deserved to be believed a year before I even walked through those doors, and she wasn't, and I think about that more than people probably expect me to. The school never made any big announcement about it, no assembly, nothing official, but news like that doesn't need an announcement. It just moves through hallways on its own like smoke. By the second day, kids were already telling 3 different versions of the story. One where I supposedly recorded her on my phone the whole time. One where my dad supposedly threatened to shut down the whole science department. None of it true. All of it somehow more interesting than what actually happened. I remember a kid I barely knew coming up to me at lunch just to ask, "So is it true you're basically royalty here now?" And I didn't even know how to answer that, because it felt like the exact opposite of how I felt, which was small and shaky, and not at all like anyone's idea of royalty. My mom sat me down around that time too, separate from all the school stuff, and told me something I didn't expect. She said she'd noticed the stomach aches back in September and almost pushed harder then, but backed off because she didn't want to smother me, didn't want to be the parent who doesn't trust their kid to handle their own life. She said watching me hide it for months taught her something about the difference between giving a kid space and missing the moment they actually need you to step in, and she said she was still still figuring out where exactly that line was, and probably always would be. I don't think I'd ever heard her admit to still figuring something out before that conversation, and it made me feel less alone in not having any of it figured out either. For a while after, I actually avoided Valeria in the halls, which sounds backwards, but I felt this weird guilt around her, like my bruises got fixed in a week, and hers never really did because nobody had proof for hers, just her word, and her word alone hadn't been enough. One day she caught up to me by the lockers and just said, "I'm glad someone finally believed one of us," and I didn't really know what to say to that, so I just nodded, and we ended up eating lunch together most days after that, not really talking about Ms. Halloran much at all, just talking about normal stuff, video games, whatever show we were both watching, like two people quietly deciding the bad thing didn't get to define the whole friendship. My dad and I are closer now, in this way I didn't expect. We don't really talk about school stuff like principal and student anymore when we're home. He made sure of that, made a real point of leaving the job at the office once he walked through our front door. But there's this understanding between us now that wasn't there before. Like he finally knows the difference between me saying fine because I'm actually fine and me saying fine because I've just gotten really good at hiding when I'm not. I still felt sick about it for a while, honestly, like I'd broken some rule by finally saying something. Kids at school kept asking why she suddenly disappeared mid-semester and I just shrugged, said I heard she transferred, let it stay a rumor instead of a fact. But my dad told me at dinner one night, real casually, while passing the mashed potatoes, that the rule I actually broke was staying silent to protect other people's opinion of me, and that one was never worth keeping in the first place. I think about that more than I think about the bruises now. Sometimes I still catch myself hesitating before I tell people something's actually wrong. That old habit doesn't just disappear because one bad situation got fixed, but I notice it now. At least, I catch the hesitation instead of just living inside it, and my dad noticed I catch it too, because now if I go quiet for too long at dinner, he'll just ask. Real simple, no pressure behind it, everything actually fine or fine. And honestly, that one small question has done more for me than almost anything else that came out of that whole year. It's a small thing. It probably sounds like a small thing typing it out, but it's the thing I actually think about when people ask if things got better, because better wasn't the day she got fired. Better was learning that somebody would keep asking until I told the truth. I ran into Ms. Halloran once more, actually, almost 2 years later, at a grocery store of all places, both of us reaching for the same brand of orange juice in the dairy aisle like nothing had ever happened between us. She saw me first, I think, because by the time I looked up she was already turning her cart the other direction. Not fast, exactly, just deliberate. The kind of turn that says, I see you, and I'm choosing not to. I stood there for a second, holding that orange juice, my heart doing something weird and fast in my chest, and I thought about all the things I could have said, could have chased her down the aisle and said, and in the end I said nothing at all. I just put the juice in my cart and kept walking, and somewhere around the cereal aisle, I realized the not saying anything didn't feel like losing this time. It felt like it just genuinely didn't matter anymore, like she'd shrunk down to the size of a stranger in a grocery store instead of the person who used to control whether I felt okay walking into a classroom. I think about Valeria a lot too, more than I probably let on to anyone. We drifted apart a little after middle school, different high schools, different friend groups, the normal way people drift, but I still think about that comment she made by the lockers more than almost anything else from that whole year, that quiet line about finally being believed. It stuck with me because it's the thing that makes this not just a story about a mean teacher getting caught, it's a story about how long something can go on simply because the person it's happening to doesn't think anyone will do anything even if they say it out loud, and how much of that fear turns out to be completely reasonable because so often nobody does do anything, right up until the moment somebody with enough power finally decides to actually look. I don't know if I'd call myself lucky, exactly, given everything it took to get there, the months of it, the bruises, the whole complicated mess of finally telling the truth, but I know I got something a lot of kids in that same exact situation never get, which is somebody who believed me immediately, no hesitation, no asking what I did to provoke it, just belief followed by action within the same week. That shouldn't be rare. Writing it out now, a couple years later, still kind of blows my mind that it is. If there's one thing I'd actually want someone to take from this, it's not the twist, not the whole principal's son reveal, even though I get why that's the part everyone latches onto first. It's the part where I sat outside my dad's office door with my hand on the handle for months, talking myself out of walking in, convinced that speaking up would make everything worse instead of better. It didn't. It made everything better, faster than I ever thought thought it could, and the only thing that changed between the version of me who stayed silent and the version who finally spoke was one conversation at a dinner table I almost didn't have. I still think about how close I came to just never having it at all.